Hey, what's going on? This is VideoFort Don and I am back with another tutorial. Today we're going to be in After Effects building a text disintegration effect using Trapcode Particular. Anyway, I hope you enjoy, but let's jump in and take a look. Okay, this is it. This is what we're going to be making in After Effects today. I will start with a new composition. Let's call this one main, and it's going to be 720p. And I will start with a text layer. Let's just type out the word energy, and let's align this to the center of the scene. So align, if you don't see that window, you can go to window and align, and it should appear somewhere in your interface. Anyway, take this and pre-compose. Let's call this text number 1. Then I'm gonna get a solid and call this noise number 1. And in this we'll apply a fractal noise effect. So in noise and grain and fractal noise, I will set the contrast to 500 to create some separation between the dark areas and the bright areas, like this. And then I will go to the brightness starting at about 200. And my timeline is 10 seconds. I will go to about 8 seconds and go to negative 200. And this is just going to go from almost pure white to all black, just like this. And this is a layer we're going to use as a mask for our text. Now that's just the first step. We need to go to Effect, Color Correction and Curves, and bring the white point to the middle, and the same with the dark point over here. This is going to just crunch everything down to a sharper looking mask, and this is what we'll use moving forward. All right, let's pre-compose this too. Let's call this noise pre number 1, and duplicate this, go to the noise layer, the one below, and use the top one as a track matte. So now if I disable the text and click the transparency grid, we only see the white pixels. Okay, and I will take these two layers now and pre-compose them. So this is like the next level of pre-composition. There's going to be a lot of pre-compositions in this video, but all of them are necessary, I promise. Anyway, this is noise to pre-composition, and click OK. And I will duplicate both of these two layers now, so my original text layer and the noise pre-comp. Let's move 2 of them to the top like this, and I will enable the text layer and use track matte again, and use the noise layer above and luma, which is just going to give me the text with the mask making it disappear. All right, and guess what? This needs to be pre-composed as well. This will be main fill mask pre-composition. This is going to be used as the main text. Well, it's the opposite of a reveal. It's making it disappear, but in reverse, it's like revealing it, right? So that's what this layer is for. Now, the reason I did all of that pre-compositioning, and you know, usually this kind of thing would take 2 steps. You know, you have the original noise layer, and you just pre-compose it onto some text, and you would essentially have the same thing. But if you want to do this next step, which is getting these outlines, then you need to use the same steps, which I have just done. Okay, so let's hide the main fill mask. Let's bring back the main noise pre-comp before we put it into a pre-comp with the text. And on this layer, we will go to Effect, Stylize, and Find Edges, and Invert. And that's how we get the outlines. And now if I take the text layer below, I will use the noise map as a track matte luma. So let's just change to that. And we now have just the outline section. Now, if this was combined with the main fill mask, which is, I guess it's hard to tell here. Let me get this image, which we'll use for the text. So if I bring the main fill mask down here, use that as a track matte for my grunge texture, now you can see the outline overlaid on top of our text, just around the edge. And that's what we have here. And we need to pre-compose this and call this outline pre. And let me just size down this texture. Let's go for about 50%, just to make it a bit sharper. And in here, we'll go to Effect, Color Correction, and Tint. The color is going to be like a dark gray. So hopefully now you can see where this is going. So one of the main things you see in the final example is, of course, the particles coming from just the outlines. So let's get a solid and let's put particles onto this. So Trapcode and Particular. We want to use the outlines as the source for the emission of the particles. So in the emitter settings, change the emitter type from point to layer. And the layer emitter in the options here, we want to point to the outline layer. This needs to be a 3D layer for this to work. So let's just turn this on, come back in here and do just that point to the outline layer. And when I do that, you should see some particles start to fly around, but the outline itself is so small of an area, you won't really see many particles being emitted because of this. So we need to increase the number of particles, let's say about 30,000 in this case. And when I do that, now we have a lot more. Now that's one way to do this. I think a better way would be to just increase the surface area of the particles. So to do this, I am going to have to do another pre-composition. So let me duplicate the outline and pre-compose this. Let's move all the attributes and call this one outline pre-composition wide. And then if we jump into this one, we want to expand the thickness of this outline effect. And the easiest way to do this is to use the matte choker effect. So under matte, get the simple choker. Actually, not matte choker, it's the simple one, because we just need to change this value. I will go for a negative value, and this is how I generate the extra width for the outlines. About -10 in this case will be fine. So using our outline and just making it wider. Okay, back in the main composition, we need to switch which layer this is pointing to. So if I first of all make this 3D as well, because it wouldn't work otherwise, go to the layer emitter and let's choose the wide version. And when I do that, you see we now have more particles because there is a larger surface area they are being emitted from. So that's the reason for doing this kind of setup. So this also means now we can lower the number of particles, let's say 10,000 instead of 30. And this means that, you know, we save some memory. We have less particles in the scene because we're using a wider source emission area. Okay, let's move on. I will go to the velocity and let's zero this out. I don't want any motion coming from this control. The motion in the scene was actually from the physics section. So if I go to here, under air, I want to go to the wind Y, which is up and down, and change this to -50, which is going to move the particles up. And let me hide this layer so we don't necessarily have to look at this. And I'll go to the turbulence field. Let's set effect position to about 200, but I will lower the evolution speed to just 25. And if I just quickly play this through, you see the particles being emitted from the point at which the text is disintegrating away from. So the outline, as you can see there, Okay, the particles are clearly too large. Let's go to the particle settings and I will change their size down to just 1. Now I also want to change the color, but as this is currently, I don't have the color control available to me. That's because of the way we set up the layer emitter. By default, it will use the color from our layer to drive the color of the particles. So we need to just change this option. Just change the RGB usage from particle color to lightness size, which means now we can independently change the color of the particles. So let's set the color to be a random color from a gradient. And if we open up the color overlay, this is where the gradient is configured. So I will start with a simple white to black and then choose my 2 colors here, which are going to be yellow on one side, maybe more of an orange, and a red or very deep orange on the other side. So we have some slight variation in the color of the particles. Let's color our outline the same using a tint effect. So color correction and tint, and just map the white to a orange color as well. Something like this. Okay, so this is shaping up pretty well. Let's build up some of the other things in the scene. We have the original texture. Let's bring this in and make it a 3D layer. And I'm going to change the orientation to 90 degrees. So this will be flat. Now we're looking at it dead on, so we can't see anything. Let's get a camera and I will use a 24mm preset. So very wide, and click OK. And now if I move around, you can see what's in the scene. So of course, these layers also need to be 3D. That's our grunge text layer and the fill mask layer as well. And now when I move around, everything follows the 3D scene. Okay, I will take this mixed grunge texture and let's put this just below our type. Go to the mask tool and get the ellipse. And we need to feather this. So if I press F, type out 500. Let's also open this up and go to the expansion and set that to -500, which is going to bring in the feather to hide any sharp edges around our texture. I will also apply a tint effect to this to make it black and white. And I will lower the opacity to about 20%. And then I want to configure my camera here. So what I would do is reset the orientation so that it's not always going around the center of the scene. So if I go to transform, auto orient, and off. And now when I rotate this, it will not be rotating around the center of the scene anymore. When I set up my cameras, I like to do this and get a null, make it 3D, and make the camera a child of the null. So that if I want to do rotation, I use the null, and then I can still control the position using the camera itself. So that's just a quick setup I will do here. It means also I can zero out the camera much easier in the X and Y direction. And let's just do a slow zooming in animation here. So at frame 0, I will be somewhere out here. Set a keyframe for the position and then go to about 8 seconds and just zoom in a bit. Maybe if I go to before the text disappears completely, I want my camera to be somewhere where the text is close to touching the edges. So I think this is correct. And I can move that keyframe to the end now, so that throughout the animation, there is some constant slow motion like this. All right, and I will just press N to limit my timeline up to that point. So that's the basic camera animation. The other things we need to do here are the reflection and various post effects, mainly just glow actually, not really much else going on here. Some glow and some basic color correction. So let me go back to my main composition. and pick a frame where we have lots of stuff happening. And I will take the outline layer, which is this, go to Effect, Stylize, and Glow. I think I'm in 8-bit right now. Let's change this to 32, which is just going to give you some better looking glows. Okay, the threshold, I will start at about 80 for now. It maybe put the radius at about 20. And I want the inside edge to be much hotter looking than this. So if I take another glow, and on the first one, let's put the threshold all the way down to 0, which is quite extreme, but I can take the radius down to 0.5 perhaps, and the intensity to 0.05, which is a very small number, but in 32-bit you should still see some results. Now I think we need to lower the intensity of the second glow, maybe 0.5 or so. Maybe too strong, but it's just an example anyway. We want to do the same to the particles, so go to Stylize and Glow there as well. And let's see, lower the threshold to about 40, but the intensity down to about 0.52. I think the particles are too large right now, and they also don't really fade out at all. So let's change a few things in here. I will go to the opacity over life, and let's choose the fade out constantly graph. And we can also do things like play with the motion blur. So in the rendering options here, I would go to motion blur, and we can use comp settings. Let's see what that looks like. So if I open this, I think in the advanced tab, it's to do with this shutter angle. So I think if this is higher, it means more blur. Let's try 500. And that doesn't seem to do anything, maybe because motion blur is not enabled. And on the layer itself as well. Okay, so that's how you would do that. Again, if I open this, let me see what changing the shutter angle will do. So this is at 500. We have some slight motion blur in some areas. If I lowered it back to the default 180, it has less motion blur. Okay, so I was correct. Let's just bump this up to about 800 perhaps. And I quite like this look here. It means we might have to lower our threshold for the glow because the particles are much smaller now and less visible. So we need to make the glow effect stronger. So just try and balance these out until you get something which looks good. Something else you can do to improve this effect is to break up the outline effect, because currently the outline is just as strong on all parts of the outline. We want to maybe make some sections narrower and others wider. And the way you do this is by using the roughen edge effect and apply this to the outline layer. So if I go to Effect, Stylize, and Roughen Edges, first of all, make sure this is above both of your glowing effects. And you want to lower the border size to about 1. And if I quickly just turn this on and off, and this is quite low resolution, but I think you can still see the difference. It just means that in some areas the stroke effect will be narrower than others. So you can play with the radius, the edge sharpness, the scale. If I lower this to about 50, and if I put the border size up to 2, that controls how much it's going to eat into the stroke layer effect. So you can really play around with this and dial in the perfect look for your text. I think I will just leave mine at 1, which gives me just some slight variation across my text. The next thing is the reflection on the floor, and for this I need to pre-compose some of the elements, so the text and outline. If I get the outline, the main text and its mask, I will pre-compose these and just move all attributes. And this is going to break the 3D layer, but if I collapse transformation by clicking this icon in the middle, it will reset to the correct positioning. So it's taking the 3D data from the previous comp and bringing it back into this comp. And it also means I can duplicate the comp, go to the scale, so press S, unlink X from Y, and then go to Y and set this to -100%, which is going to make this upside down. And I can just move this down to be somewhere below the floor, and it's going to appear as a reflection. I will put this below our grunge layer, which only has an opacity of 20%, if you recall. And also, just to break up the reflection, I would make a copy of the grunge layer, and the one directly above, let's put this back up to 100%, and then use it as a luma matte for our reflection layer. So if I go to the track matte menu, if it's not there, press F4 and luma matte, and point to the grunge layer, and this is going to make it look a bit more like it's a reflection on this floor surface. Let's go to Effect, Blur and Sharpen, and I'm going to apply a directional blur, set this to about 20, and then maybe just a normal blur layer as well, so a fast box blur, and set this to about 3. And that's how I created this interactive reflection. If I were to just jump out of this camera, so let's get a new one, move around with this, you will see that the reflection is dynamic and it looks like it's actually in the 3D scene. The last thing you want to do is some extra color adjustments, but also make sure that there is a black layer below everything, because I think currently we're still rendering through no pixels in most areas. So let's just put something behind everything in the frame. And I will take a new adjustment layer, put this at the top, and go to Effect, Color Correction and Curves. And in here I will just play with maybe some blue in the shadows and a smaller amount of green. Nothing too complicated here. And perhaps just some more contrast. So make it brighter in some areas and create this kind of S-curve to add some contrast. So that's very basic there. And the only other thing you might do is maybe put an overlaying glow effect on top of everything, but maybe increase the threshold, I would say around 80, and the radius, make this higher, let's say about 200. And this will make a diffused glow effect over everything that's in the scene. So when we play this back now, you have the text disappearing and the particles are only emitted from the edge of the burn effect. And I would say that's a pretty cool disintegration effect using Trapcode Particular. And what's great about the way that I set this up using all of those pre-compositions is that I can go back to the text layer, for example, and change this to anything I want. So let's type out motion, for example. And if I just go back to my main composition, it will automatically update and all of the layers will be correct, except to render if I wanted to output something different. I can also change the colors very easily. So let's say the outline layer, which is in here, we can change this orange to a blue color, so maybe 185 on the hue, and everything will automatically update. If I go back into this comp, we now have this. Of course, I would have to change the color of my particles, but that's just a few clicks as well. There is one slight effect which I forgot now that I look at this. It's the edge you see around the text before it disappears, this slight orange edge. This was just a layer style on our comp. So if I jump into this, let's pre-compose the fill mask layer and the grunge texture. and I will just go to layer styles and bevel and emboss. Inside of this, let's put the highlight color to the same kind of orange, maybe a bit more red. And I will set the size to 1. Zero out this angle, just set that to 0, and the technique will be the chisel hard. Make this much higher and it will sharpen and brighten the effect. And now when I go back to the main layer, we will have that extra layer, but I think my 3D collapse isn't working. I took it off here, so let's enable this and go back. And there we go. It's back to normal now. It might just give it a bit more depth than before when we just had the flat layer on its own. A few other customizations you can do is things like change this from text to just a logo. So if you have a custom logo, you can just bring that in here instead. It also just needs to be a black and white version of your logo so you don't break the LumaMat setup. But if I now go back to the main composition, you will see it is updated with the logo. And let's say you wanted a custom color for your logo, you can still do that. If I go back to the text layer and make a copy of my logo here, so I'm pressing Ctrl and C, I should be able to take it into the main composition, and let's search for where this is, this gray grungy texture. I think it's at this level. I will just replace the grunge texture with the logo here. And in fact, I will just make a copy, go to the new logo and LumaMat onto our mask. And then if I turn off the one that's underneath, I should be able to color this in now with anything I want. So if I go to Effect, Generate, and Gradient Ramp, let's just pretend this was a blue and red version of my logo. Of course, I have just colored this in here, but it means that if I go back to this level, I now have a color version of my logo and everything would just stay the same. The crucial thing here is that in the very lowest level of our pre-composition, in the text layer, this still needs to be a black and white version. And another type of customization you can make is the scale of the noise. So we have been working with a default scale of 100. In the transform tab of our fractal noise, we can actually go back and change this to be higher or lower. So if I make it lower, let's say 50, it's going to create a smaller scale, which means I will have more holes and outlines on my logo, and it creates something quite different. Now you may have to go and make some other adjustments to the other effects, but I just wanted to illustrate how much control you have with the pre-compositions. But that's it for this tutorial. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you learned something new. I will see you next time. If you are still watching, this is an experiment I am doing just to see if it adds anything to the effect. I am going to see if I can create like a hot metal distortion being caused by the heat of the particle here. So if I take the particular layer, this would need to be pre-composed in a separate composition with the camera. So I have to duplicate this whole setup. So Control and D. Let's move this to the top and pre-compose that. So move all the attributes to the composition. And this will be just a particular layer like this. Now we need to lower the number of particles but make them larger. So I might go for 1,000 instead. And let's set the size to about 5, which is quite, a lot larger, but just bear with me here. If I go to the set color, I will just set this to be at birth, and let's leave it as white. So if I play this through now, I will just have this. I think I will turn off the motion blur for now, so it's renders faster. So let's go to the glow as well and turn that off. We don't need it. And I think the particles might be too small. Okay, maybe it's not too important. Let's see. I think I'll actually make the blur effect stronger. I will switch to on, which is using the Trapcode settings instead of the camera settings. So I will go to the shutter angle and go for 1000 here, maybe even more, let's say 2000, which should be quite exaggerated. And I can go back to the main composition, and what I should be able to do now is use this layer as a distortion map. So let me get an adjustment layer and go to effect, and let's see, in distort we want the displacement map, and you see by default it kind of does some crazy thing where everything is shifted. Let's choose our layer. It's going to be pre-comp number 3, which is the particles layer. It's not clear whether there is any change at all, but when I turn this on and off now, you can see some slight movement. So let's exaggerate this and set it to about 10. And what I should get when I play this through is some areas where there will be a heat distortion effect. So let's go to the very beginning and just play this through and see if it has done anything. And when I play it back, I get this kind of thing here. There is some distortion in some areas, and maybe it's not too obvious. It's probably one of those things where if it's there, you don't necessarily notice it, but it adds something to the overall effect. But I just wanted to show you that you can do a few more things on top of what we did before to try and make the effect more interesting. Anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.